Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Yeah, this is The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and today we're talking about immigration and citizenship. We have Gordon Maynard and Rudy Kisher here from Maynard Kisher Stojkovic in downtown Vancouver in Yaletown, otherwise known as MKS. And great to have you guys here. Before, we kind of had a little bit of fun talking about the U.S. Politics and how, you know, we're having some searches for maybe Americans wanting to come north of the border, depending on who gets elected. Now we're talking about refugees, and this is a real story. Last week, not today, but last Sunday, they had Justin Trudeau on 60 Minutes talking about how Canada settled 25,000 and more refugees are coming. And this is a unique situation, Rudy, in that we actually pay to lift people from far away and bring them into our country. Yeah, now, different than Europe because they have no choice, right?
Yeah, it's an amazing program actually. So the UNHCR, who has organized this with the Canadian government, has a policy in which you can actually bring in refugees that are abroad, that are outside of their home country in desperate situations. And there are currently about 10 countries that participate in this, what's called a resettlement process. So it's different where refugees have fled, for example, to Germany, are knocking on the door and say, oh, I want to stay here, I've made it here, please let me stay. There are about 10 countries, Canada and the US being the major ones, that say we will select a bunch of refugees and we'll let them come to Canada. And
well, just to jump in, because in the 60 Minutes story, they said Canada has brought in 25,000 with more to come, and the U.S., I think it was 3,000.
Yeah.
So if you look at the population, we're doing a disproportionately higher number.
I mean, it's absolutely fantastic story that I think Canada has every right to be very proud of, because we also have another section. Like, not only is the government paying for this, we are the only country in the world that has private sponsorship of refugees. This means that a sort of a community group, which already have sponsorship holding agreements with the government, or a group, we have another category, it's called the Group of Five, can get together, raise the money. So for a family of four, you got to raise about, a family of four, somewhere between $30,000 and $40,000, raise that money and saying, we would like to support that family. We'll bring them over here and we'll make sure that they have housing, that they're set up, that they find a job, and we'll take care of them for a year. And we're on the hook financially for a year. So individuals can actually action that through the help of the government. We're the only country in the world that allows that. It's a really special process.
I thought that was a good chance when the whole thing blew up last summer with all these refugees spilling across the Mediterranean into Turkey and Greece and heading up into Central Europe, that the government then at the time, the Conservatives, to say, hey, listen, we'll partner with all of these community groups, mostly churches, and say, we'll match dollar for dollar whatever you, because if you think about it, a refugee family comes, they're going to have a much greater chance if they have a connection to a community of people, whether it's a synagogue or a Catholic church or Presbyterians or whoever it is, right? And they're going to bring people in and they're going to help them settle. Then if they just come and land here and stick them in the Hotel 8, and good luck, right?
The stats are they do 30%. They find a job sort of in a year, so 30% faster if they're privately sponsored, because the chance of finding, when somebody actually takes the individual responsibility and says, I'm going to find you a job, I'm going to make those phone calls and call my buddy up who I know has a fast food restaurant and see if we can get you a job there, or a factory and see if we can get you a job on the floor there.
Now, Gordon, we're going to get you in on this, but can you tell us your personal story about how you have been working with your congregation to do this?
So our congregation has sponsored, in the last year, has agreed to sponsor. 3 years ago, we sponsored an Iraqi Catholic family to come to Canada, and now we've agreed to sponsor 3 other families, 2 of them being Syrian Catholics that we sponsored that were living in Aleppo. So they've had their whole homes bombed. Right, so
that's the isolated city that really is
just
an
got
island,
razed.
Right?
It was beautiful, a UNESCO site. Like when you look at pictures of the place, it was a UNESCO site because it's been a center point for trade for hundreds. One of the oldest civilizations in the world, places where man has lived for 6,000 years.
Wow.
So you have churches and mosques and buildings that have been there for thousands of years, and they just did a whole revamp. UNESCO recognized it as a World Heritage Site. It's just been razed to the grounds, right? And so they've been living in Amman, and our church, stepped up and basically raised the money. So we had to privately raise that money, and then go through the government process. And they arrived, unbelievably, 2 weeks ago on a Wednesday. We went to the airport and picked them up, and then 8 days later, we went and picked up the guy's brother also arrived, right? So
And how are they doing?
they're doing fantastic. They're a little bit shell shocked. I mean, the English is limited on some of them. In some of the family members, the father in one has learned English through watching movies. So his spoken English is actually sort of.
So he sounds like John
knitted.
Wayne.
Yeah, he's more like Al Capone. No, but he's it's been pretty. It's been.
So what's their this is a nice personal point of this is what is their impression of us and what are their hopes for their children?
I mean, they want their kids to learn English. I mean, that was very clear.
But
from the family.
are they wanting to go back when this is all finished?
I don't think they believe. They're Catholics. They're Christians. There's no hope for them going back. I mean, you take a look at what ISIS is doing. They line them up, they behead them. I mean, it's not like they're Muslims that there's any hope that they're going to go back. And the property they had has just been blown up with their father in it, with their the grandfather of the kids died in it. I don't think there's any thought of them going back. They realize their life is here. They want the kids to learn English, and they want to start working and take part of the Canadian dream, which is come here and get a good future for your kids and work hard and be part of Canadian society.
Is it going to be hard to get them jobs?
I think it's going to be a challenge. I mean, it's definitely.
Is that the hardest part for getting them here, finding them apartment?
It's all hard. None of it's easy.
No,
none of it's hard. None of it's easy. You got to raise the money. You got to find people that are going to put forward $40,000. Then you got to deal with the government bureaucracy that could take a year, 2 years. So we've agreed to also sponsor an Iraqi family, because they're Iraqis and they're not Syrians. They've gone to the back of the line. So we've been in process to sponsor them for about a year and a half, right?
Before this all happened,
and now they're at the back of the queue. And the reason they're at the back of the queue is because they're not Syrian. Because the government has a target, and I used to work for the UNHCR, and I know what it's like. You're given a target, and you work with the government who's going to take them. The Iraqis now, there's no hope of them coming in the next year because all the spaces are filled up by the Syrians.
But didn't a lot of the refugees that have come into Canada are not all Iraqi, not Syrian? Some of them are North African and.
Not this 25. No. That number, when they talk 25. They mean 25 Syrians because that was the pledge, right? And so everybody else, all the Africans and everybody else that was waiting, nobody's getting new papers issued because of the political, which is harsh. I mean, it's a reality. They made a promise and they're sticking to it, but somebody pays, right? Mr. Sunnyways, I'm a big supporter of Justin Trudeau. I'll say that openly. But the reality is you got to make choices sometimes, and that costs somebody. You can't take everybody.
Well, that's part of
when they committed to the 25,000 refugees. This wasn't 25,000 additional refugees.
Right.
It appears that the choice that the government makes is that we'll take refugees from this pressure area that's developed, but that's going to be part of our overall numbers. So other people who are in the stream that would otherwise have been selected from overseas, they're not going to be picked as quickly anymore.
So how many? Okay, you said 280,000 immigrants coming to the country. Of that number, how many typically are refugees?
30,000.
So this is taking up the bulk.
And then 10 of those are usually in Canada processed. So we rarely take over 20,000 overseas. So
from what I hear, and you would know this because you're on the front lines, this is putting a huge strain on resources to get apartments and jobs. So
my experience recently, it's a nightmare with them all coming at one time. I can't get. So when the Iraqi family came, we were able to get them into schooling right away to learn English. Right. So there was government programs. We cannot get the family that just arrived. We can't get them into a language room. We might have to wait 6 months.
Well, then I guess then you go back to your congregation and say, well, let's hire a tutor or something, right? Like that's hard to do.
Yeah.
But it isn't just your church that's having this problem. All of the immigrant settlement services are running into this problem. When you bring in an influx like this in all the neighborhoods across Canada, but particularly the major cities, it's difficult to find them homes. It's difficult to find them jobs.
Look at the price of real estate and rent. It's astronomical. So with all of these people coming in, is it taking resources away from the government for other business that you would need to do with the government in order to get people across the border, maybe Americans or British or French or something? So is anybody lifting the phone to answer your calls or returning emails? Or is it impacting the government?
Well, the government had to find bodies to send overseas for the processing and to deal with the bodies in Canada who needed to be dealt with. So they were picking people from other lines of business and saying, got to go help. There's only so many hands at the tiller, and we don't have enough. We need to draw them in. So other lines of business have suffered and are suffering.
PR card is one of them. So every permanent resident has a card that identifies them as a permanent resident. It allows them to travel in and out of Canada without any issue, right? And allows them to get certain government services if they need to show they're a permanent resident. So that policy used to, on a good, when it was running well, would run at 30 to 60 days. So, which is typical. You
Pretty
think
quick. That's not too bad.
That's reasonable, right?
Yeah.
You think your card's going to expire. You got 2 months left. I should be able to. It's not like it's a big process. It's now running at over 6 to 7 months.
Wow.
So,
it's a serious issue, and it's one that we'll talk about later in this program, but that's a very serious issue. And one that hasn't got a lot of news attention.
And the same thing with work permits. So work permits are usually typical. So you're working in Canada. Your employer says, I want to keep you here. Like, okay, we can go online and we can apply. Well, 30 days is kind of what most people think. Well, we're a month out. We'll take care of this right now. It's now taking over 100 days. Right? So you got 3 months. You come in on a 1-year work permit, you're a quarter through, you better be thinking about applying right away.
Applying as soon as you get it.
Yeah.
It's like when they say they paint a bridge, they start at one end, do the other, then they start again. So what's your advice to anybody listening about the refugee situation and maybe the impact that they might have if they have to deal with the government through a firm like yours? Like, is it better to get these things going quicker?
Yeah, I think if you've got an immigration application, I think you've got to realize the government is under a lot of pressure now with the promise it made to bring in the refugees.
And they said they've done that.
And
so
they said they're going to bring in another 8,500, right?
Yeah,
so they've limited, and they're talking about maybe bringing in more next year. So I don't know if that's going to lighten up or what, but another 8,500 is still a lot of pressure and getting them settled here. So I think what you're going to say, what my advice to clients is, get some help and get it soon. Go see somebody about what your process is. If it's us or somebody else that's licensed to give you some advice, and start that process much sooner rather than later.
All right.
I think every single line of business in immigration is suffering from delay. Every single line of business.
Because the last time we talked, you said you had seen some parts where, but in the time since you went in last, you've noticed a change even since then. Yeah. So we want to switch and talk about ETA. What is that? Estimated time of arrival is what I know it is, but that's obviously not what it means.
It's electronic travel authorization.
Okay, and what is that?
Yet another piece of paper that somebody needs to get to travel to Canada, as if there weren't enough already.
And from just to visit, or?
Yes, mainly it applies to people who are temporary visitors to Canada, whether they're coming as workers or students, visitors. And normally these people, if they come from a visa-exempt country, if you have somebody coming from England.
Or Australia.
Or Australia, Europe, States, they simply hop on a plane and come to Canada. All right. Sometimes if they want a work permit, they apply before they come. Depends what category they're in. But now those people need to apply for an ETA, electronic travel authorization. You do this on the website. And this is supposed to kick in mid-month, middle of March.
March 15th, yeah.
Yeah. And you go to the website, you put in your information, an ETA is issued, and it's matched to your passport. And that's an important point. And normally it's good for 5 years. But if you have a passport that's only got 2 years left on it, you'll have to get another ETA when you get a new passport.
I'll tell you what, we'll stop right there and we'll pick it up and find out more about that and how the changes have affected people coming to Canada. This is The Law Show on CL 650. Today we're talking about immigration and citizenship. Very good conversation so far. We talked about Donald Trump, we've talked about refugees, and we'll get into the impact of changes to the government and people coming across the border when we return next on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.